Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Welcome back to Middle School GSA, your favorite LGBTQ plus podcast. As always, we are not actually middle schoolers. The title is just for fun. I am your host, Demigloom. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host.
Feloni's Ferris. My pronouns are they, them. Hello, everyone.
Indeed. How are you doing today, Feloni's Ferris?
You know.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys heard, but it's Jover.
Well, it's not truly over until people lose hope. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. All hope is not lost until you lose hope. You are the one who determines if it is over or not. It's certainly deeply unfortunate that we're faced with these circumstances, but nevertheless, we persist, and, you know, support each other, join mutual aid groups. If you're trans, and you rely on HRT, get a passport and save some money up just in case. But I
say move to a blue state. That's my advice.
Move to a blue state, absolutely, 100%. If you're in a red state, there's no justification for living in a red state as a trans person right now. It's way too dangerous. Yeah, just move to a blue state.
Yeah, be in a blue state. And there's not a lot of them this year, or there weren't a lot of blue states this year, but like move to a blue state or a swing state.
A state with a blue state government.
Yes, which includes Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be fucking fine, Florida fans. Get fucked.
But yeah, don't let them crush your hope. Don't let yourselves be defeated. We're gonna keep going.
We're a little defeated. We are a little. We have to admit a little bit of defeat.
This is a individual defeat, but don't let them defeat your spirit. Keep fighting. Keep pushing. Keep being alive. Just staying alive in and of itself is an act of resistance, and as long as you're alive, we haven't been defeated entirely.
ReZero ED2, everybody. We have a
stupid.
We have a topic tonight, and it's autism. And I'm gonna be perfectly brutally honest. I still don't think I have a very academic understanding of what autism is. I pretty much just understand it as a series of symptoms that, when combined, affect people's lives in a unique way. And I know what some of those symptoms are, but other than that, I'm pretty clueless as to how autism actually works. So luckily, we have somebody here with autism and with a good understanding of what autism is to explain it to us.
Wow.
So, Felonious Ferris, what is autism?
Well, autism, a lot of people get confused when they hear the word neurodivergent. They think that it applies to all mental disorders. When actually neurodivergent specifically applies to neurological disorders, developmental neurological disorders. So that's OCD, that's ADHD, that's bipolar disorder, and that's autism. You cannot get autism from anything. There's nothing that triggers autism. Like one day you're just not autistic, and the next something happens and you're autistic. Autistic people are born the way that they are. And it is highly, highly hereditary. If you're autistic, it's likely that one of your parents is autistic, or both of them. There's no cure for it. And the actual neurological mechanisms behind autism remain mysterious. But yeah. Grouping of specific symptoms, behaviors, yeah.
Wait, so I was right.
What were you right about?
Wait, so I do know what autism is because I knew everything you just said.
Yeah.
Oh, what are some of these symptoms?
Oh boy, then? Off the top of my head, a very famous one is many autistic people struggle with eye contact, making and maintaining eye contact, And then alternatively, some autistic people make too much eye contact. It, where most people can just kind of feel when it's right to make and break eye contact, autistic people, usually don't. Of course, it's a spectrum disorder, which I'll get into in more detail later. So not everyone struggles with eye contact, but it's very, very common. I know
A
that.
lot of these symptoms have to do with the intuitive nature of social constructs, right?
Yeah. Or social cues, body language, stuff like that. The other big one, which really is it's one of the only autism symptoms that's just necessary to be diagnosed with autism, period. And that is stimming. It's also called self-stimulation, which don't be fucking weird about that. And
What do you mean weird about that?
I've heard people be weird about it.
Oh, like touching yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's pretty funny. We should roll with that.
But stimming, so autistic people usually have sensory integration problems, which means autistic people just experience the world around them through their senses differently than other people do. They might be more sensitive to certain stimuli, and that could become very overwhelming. Or they, I say or, I mean and, sometimes they feel, or I feel, deprived of stimulation. So stimming is sensory seeking. It's seeking, sensory input that is, soothing. You are all probably familiar with the typical stereotyped movements, like arm flapping, stuff like that.
Like bouncing,
stuff
hand
like
fidgeting.
that. Yeah. But it can be vocal. Lots of autistic people have something called, or, stim, and it's called echolalia. I put that really poorly, but, it's called echolalia. And that's vocal stimming. So making repeated noises or repeating certain words or phrases over and over again. Yeah.
And they're all vines for some reason. Like all of them.
False. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make this the roast of autistic people. I
Yeah.
just keep coming
Yeah.
up with funny jokes.
Yeah. But of course, stimming can be much more covert. It could be just playing with your hair or bouncing your leg. But it has to happen to a certain extent, for it to be considered stimming. And I'll throw out there that every human being stims to a certain extent. It's just autistic people do it more and rely on it more to keep themselves, emotionally regulated.
I'll also add that stimming is one of the things that overlaps in the Venn diagram between ADHD and autism. Stimming is very similar between people with severe ADHD and people with autism.
Yeah.
Right? I'm right about that, right?
You
That's
are
what
right
they
about
told
it.
me.
But autistic people typically, it's more pronounced in them. So there is stimming with ADHD. But with people with autism, it's much more likely to be especially noticeable, or I don't know how else to put it, extreme.
It's harder to mask with autism than with ADHD.
Well, it's not just masking though.
Not just masking, you're right.
But yeah. More symptoms are, I think people tend to forget the fact that autism is a developmental disorder. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. And that means that there are key indicators in childhood that you cannot see as an adult. And if you do not have these indicators in childhood, then it means that you probably don't have autism. Big ones, I mean, there's just your typical lacking normal social awareness, which was big for me, as well as the sensory seeking and the sensory integration problems. Speech delays are very common in autism, so autistic children will learn how to speak, or not will, but will sometimes learn how to speak later than other children, or they may never learn how to speak at all, or they may only be able to speak. Oh God, what term should I use? There's varying degrees of speech with autistic people. I'm on the end of the spectrum where I have no problems with language. I mean, talking can get exhausting for me after a while, but I have no problems in general with language. There are autistic people that will mostly speak in incomplete sentences or only a couple of words at a time, or they'll have a highly reduced vocabulary, or they don't speak at all. And it's important to kind of highlight the difference between verbal and speaking, because many autistic people are non-speaking, but they are verbal. Verbal would mean that they understand language, so that they can tell what you're saying when you're saying it to them. They just can't talk back. So nonverbal isn't really used as a term when referring to autistic people anymore. There may be other developmental delays, just like typical learning to walk later, bathroom stuff later, that kind of thing. What else?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, why do you think autistic people are stereotyped as being either very stupid or very intelligent? I'm not saying this is true, but like, why is that the stereotype, do you think?
Well,
where does that come from?
I think that that's just kind of misguided. I think that has a lot to do with the way that autistic people are portrayed in the media. Either they're super geniuses or they're completely incapable of caring for themselves. I think that a lot of it has to do with social skills. So even if an autistic person is highly intelligent, they may struggle to express that intelligence in a way that can be understood by the people around them. And like, I don't know. I know lots of autistic people that are of average intelligence. It's true that people in the very high IQ range, IQ, I could go on a whole rant about that, but just for the point of utility in this conversation, I'll say IQ. But people in the very high IQ range tend to be autistic. Of course, not everyone who's very high IQ is autistic, but there's more autistic people who are high IQ. And there is some truth to there being some grouping around very highly intelligent and I don't want to. It's difficult to put into context because intelligence, like autism, is a spectrum. So I'm sure that people have heard of cases of savants, who are people who have spectacular abilities. There's a person who is not fully non-speaking, so they don't say any words, and they are unable to care for themselves. But this person, when they were taken up into a helicopter to survey New York City, they were able to go, once they were presented with a large piece of paper, they were able to draw the entire skyline of New York City from memory, highly, highly accurately. So there's people who you might assume are unintelligent, just from basic interactions with them, but their skills may lie elsewhere. And that is very, very often the case. It is true that some autistic people, or a lot of autistic people, have very high support needs. And support needs go from level 1 to level 3, with 1 being needing minimal to no support for day-to-day functioning, and 3 being needing constant support for pretty much everything. I'm level 1 support needs, which means I'm able to have a job, and I'm able to go to school, and I'm able to take care of myself for the most part. These things are judged based off of ADLs, which are activities of daily life. So just things that you do to take care of yourself: taking a shower, brushing your teeth, doing your laundry, going to school, going to work, driving a car. All of these things. These are all activities of daily life. And your ability to perform these independently is what determines your support needs level. So it's true that there are many, many autistic people who have very high support needs, so they need complete support for their entire lives. They'll never be able to live independently. And there are many instances of people who just, in most measurable senses, oh god, just take this part out. Not the activities of daily life part. And you can really struggle with your activities of daily life, needing lots and lots of support, while also being, from a conventional perspective, highly intelligent. Support needs are not affected by quote-unquote intelligence. There are many autistic people who, like me, are fully speaking, hitting these benchmarks so that in day-to-day life, you might not immediately be able to tell that they're autistic, or you might not be able to tell at all. But in their day-to-day life, they require a lot of support to get their activities of daily life done. And this is highly affected by something called executive dysfunction, which is another very common symptom of autism, where things like decision-making and initiating tasks is very difficult. This is also something that occurs very commonly in ADHD. So, for instance, I'll really want to do my homework. I'll like doing my homework. It'll be due sometime in the near future, and yet I'm unable to initiate the task. And it's not for a lack of feeling horrible about it. It's just there's something in my brain. It just feels like an insurmountable wall that I need to scale in order to get the task started. And executive functioning is affected by a few different things. Novelty is one of them. So if it's kind of an activity that's really novel and exciting, you might be more enthusiastic about doing it. Or if there's urgency to it, so say my homework is due 3 hours from now, suddenly the urgency will kick in and I'll be able to do it. And there's more aspects to it as well. What was I gonna say? Another common symptom that you're probably familiar with is special interests. So very, very commonly, autistic people will have one or a few different interests that they just can't stop thinking about and will never stop talking about, and oftentimes, their life will be largely structured around these interests. For me, it's animals and ecology, as well as plants, politics as well, unfortunately. I love psychology, education in general. I'm just really, 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 really interested in and passionate about. You've probably had an experience with an autistic person's special interest where, trains is It's a really famous one where someone is just like so into trains. They have this huge model train collection that they've spent thousands of dollars on. They love going to the train station to see trains and riding trains. That's just kind of a quintessential special interest. But it can be any number of things, pretty much any subject that you can think of. An autistic person probably has a special interest for it. Can be anything from, like me, learning and education to things as simple as colors. But yeah.
Incredible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think, are we ready to address the elephant in the room?
Um,
Or do you have more?
I might. Oh, routine is another one. Autistic people very, very commonly, really just for their, just emotional regulation need a routine that they can stick to. Just rituals throughout the day. And when those routines are disrupted, it's, very common that autistic people will become very upset. Since it is a source of emotional regulation for them. When that is lost, so is the emotional regulation. This is something that I see really commonly, people making fun of. Like, oh, so dramatic. This small detail went wrong, and now you're having a breakdown over it. But I wanna say that it's real as hell. That emotional distress is real as hell. And shouldn't be belittled. This kind of segues into the topic of meltdowns. So from any number of sources, this can be due to a routine being disrupted, like I just said, or it can be due to sensory overload, where an autistic person's sensory integration problems just come to a head, and this can be, I guess it can be light or sound or texture. Just, have you ever had the feeling where you put on socks and you can just feel the seam in your sock and it bugs the hell out of you? It's like that, but for everything. And very, very intensely. And this can cause something that's called a meltdown, where an autistic person, might lose the ability to speak, or they might start stimming more aggressively. They might start hurting themselves, which is a type of stimming. They might start crying. They overall, it's just a kind of extreme. It's extreme disorientation and distress all at once. So just if you see someone having what probably is a meltdown in public, just be kind to them. What they're going through is real and really agonizing, and they don't need to be made fun of on top of that. What else? It is actually true that autistic people might be clumsy. So this has to do with just spatial awareness. Like for me, this manifests in the form of me constantly slamming my shoulders into doorways because I forget my body has width and I exist in space and time. For other people, this might just be having poor balance. It might be, it might just be having poor balance or just bumping into things a lot. And another big one is that autistic people, it's a very common symptom that autistic people won't visually emote very much, or their voices will be very monotone. So not a lot of vocal intonations up and down. So because of this, a lot of autistic people are labeled as cold or uncaring when they're actually experiencing a full spectrum of emotions. You just aren't able to observe it from an outside perspective. I think that's all good.
Alrighty. So with all of this, first of all, you're just describing me, by the way, in all of this. So it's very reassuring. But um, the elephant in the room is that
It's what?
Felonious Ferris thinks I have autism, and I don't think I do. And today I was going to take a test. How reputable is this test? First of all, is what I want to know.
It's very reputable. It's I think in studies it's 99% accurate in indicating autism. Of course, it's a quiz. So of course it's possible that someone just won't be able to give an accurate report about their own behavior, which is very common. But with the research that we have saying how accurate it is, it's a reliable first step.
And I'll have Felonious Ferris here to hold me accountable about my behaviors because they seem to understand myself a lot better than I understand. Seem to understand me a lot better than I understand myself sometimes. With some of the, I feel like with like some certain mannerisms and stuff, having an outside person would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And if you think that you have autism, you can go online right now and go take the RADS-R test, RAADS-R. And if you test above the threshold for autism, consider going to a doctor about it and asking if you can get tested. Contrary to popular belief, not all autism testing is extremely expensive. The way that I was tested was just in kind of an interview format where a psychiatrist interviewed my mom about my developmental benchmarks. But yeah.
All right. I don't want to take this on the show if that's okay.
What?
I've kind of changed my mind because it's going to be extremely embarrassing to admit certain things.
Okay.
So I was thinking we could just pause and then do the reveal. I
All
like
right.
hit record and then before I hit see results, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So we can end the recording now. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, we are back. Answered a bunch of really embarrassing questions, and Felonious Ferris is looking at my screen.
Mm-hmm.
We are about to see the results of this reputable autism test to see whether or not Demigloom has autism, and then we'll talk about it. Oh, I'm about to hit it. I'm actually really nervous right now. My heart rate is accelerated.
Why?
Because this is scary.
How is it scary?
It's a very life-dominating diagnosis. Not that this is a diagnosis. All right, I'm going to do it. 137. What does that mean?
That means you probably have autism.
So 160 is very strong evidence for autism. 130 means the mean score of autistic people, strong evidence for autism. Okay. So I've exceeded the mean score of autistic people.
Mm-hmm.
My language subtotal is 4. Social relatedness subtotal is 49. Sensory motor subtotal is 53. I thought that said something else. My circumscribed interests subtotal is 31. And you can probably reverse engineer what I don't actually no you can't. I was gonna say maybe you could reverse engineer what questions I answered yes to. I don't know. Yeah, so I'm probably autistic according to this supposedly reputable rigged test. It's not real. So what do I do now? If I'm an autistic if I'm a person who just took this test and I found out I have a good chance, hey, you went over it. I should go to my doctor and talk. I should ask my doctor about Ozempic or what?
If you have a psychiatrist, you should go to your psychiatrist. If you just have a doctor, you should go to your doctor. And ask them for a referral to a psychiatrist. But yeah.
Not any psychiatrist can do neuropsych testing too.
Yeah. But yeah, that's your next steps. Obviously, it's not accessible to everyone, but just remember that having a diagnosis can feel really good and be really helpful, but you can get the helpful aspects of a diagnosis without a diagnosis. So you can stop being so judgmental of yourself and attributing traits of yours to some kind of moral failing like laziness, and start being less judgmental of them. You can look at online resources for coping skills. You you can get products that are designed for autistic people for self-soothing, stuff like that.
This is fucking bullshit. It's not real. It's fake and not real.
Mm-hmm. It when I so Viewers, you may not know this, but I was a very late autism diagnosis. So I was diagnosed when it was the day after my 20th birthday. And I am now 21. And there are a number of factors that went into why I was never diagnosed as a child. I was diagnosed with ADHD as like a toddler. um, but at the time I was being tested for everything, the criteria for autism were different than they are now. About 5 years later, the criteria totally changed. Some things remained the same, but it became official that autism was classified as a spectrum diagnosis. A spectrum diagnosis is just, there are all sorts of symptoms that you can have to varying degrees. You could have one a whole lot and another one not at all. But if you had enough of them to a certain degree, then you could be diagnosed with the spectrum disorder, in this case autism. And so, yeah, about 5 years after I got all my testing done, the criteria totally changed and I became eligible for an autism diagnosis, but I was never retested. And some contributing factors for this are autism tends to present very differently in AFABs and AMABs. And a lot of the research that we have on autism is on AMAB children. So not AMAB adults, not AFAB children, not AFAB adults. Just AMAB children. And because it presents so differently, that makes it oftentimes really, really hard to get diagnosed if you're AFAB. A really common trait of AFABs with autism is masking. So masking is just the ability to hide your symptoms. So it's more likely for an AFAB to be able to disguise their symptoms of autism so that it's less detectable in interactions with other people. I'm very high masking, for instance. Masking is really exhausting and it can be super hard to do, as well as super stressful, and a lot of it just comes from fear of judgment. But yeah, but I should say that AMABs also mask. It's not just AFABs. It's just AFABs tend to a bit more, and also AFABs tend to have lower support needs autism. So there are fewer AFABs with very high support needs autism. I will say that I do not support self-diagnosis for a number of reasons. For all psychiatric disorders. This is because it is very, very common for if someone self-diagnoses themselves with something that they don't have, they will start imitating those symptoms, and they may not be conscious of it, but they'll start imitating them. And in with disorders like depression and anxiety, you can actually give yourself the disorder. So you didn't have anxiety before, but you started subconsciously imitating the symptoms, and now you do have anxiety for real. Of course, that can't happen with autism. It's a neurological disorder, or neurodevelopmental. But you can still start imitating the symptoms subconsciously, which may make it more difficult for you to operate in your day-to-day life. And additionally, it can add to stigma when someone who isn't diagnosed and when someone who doesn't have it diagnoses themselves, and then starts going around using the disorder as an excuse for their behavior, like, oh, I was a dick to you because I'm autistic, whatever. So not only is that bad for you in your day-to-day life and just like existing in a social context, but it's also bad for people who are actually autistic, because who's going to suffer from all of those perceptions that you're showing other people? Other people are going to hear that from you and they're going to go, oh, okay, autistic people are dicks. And like I said, that'll cause actually autistic people to suffer. It's best avoided just from a number of contexts. Even if you don't think that you're going to do that, just don't self-diagnose. Yeah, you can, like I said before, you can work on your self-esteem and being less judgmental towards yourself. You can work on developing coping skills and things like that, all without a diagnosis. Get diagnosed if you can. I think it's a good thing to do. But if you can't, don't sweat it. It'll be okay. Yeah.
And just because you don't have, say, autism, for since that's what we're talking about, doesn't mean you don't experience the things. Doesn't mean that the things that led you to believe that you had autism, or the things that led you to be concerned that you might have autism, are invalid, or that those things aren't real. You can experience a number of the things that are, say, on this test, while nonetheless not having autism, and those experiences and those struggles are very much real. You don't need a diagnosis to quote unquote excuse the behavior. You could still experience distress related to certain things. You could still experience difficulty managing certain things socially, without having autism. So
absolutely 100%. I couldn't agree more. It's also important to consider that having symptoms does not equal having a disorder. You could, for instance, maybe you stim a lot. If you don't have the other autism symptoms to enough of a degree, you're still not autistic. You could struggle with social interactions, or you could struggle with eye contact individually. But it just you have to have several of the symptoms to enough of a degree. And that's not it's something that's difficult to determine, yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say for the most part.
Me too.
Since it's the autism episode, you could let me go on a rant about my special interest, or a special interest of mine.
Pick one?
Right now it's split brain patients. That's so cool.
Oh yeah.
So fucking cool. I'm so
What's
into
a split
it.
brain patient?
A split brain patient is someone who has had their corpus callosum partially or entirely severed. Your corpus callosum, which is the main neural pathway through which your left and your right hemisphere communicate. Or you might have a commissurotomy, where your corpus callosum is partially or wholly severed, and some of your other commissures are severed. Commissures, which are also neural pathways between your two hemispheres. And these operations are done in cases of intractable epilepsy or refractory epilepsy, where it's just your symptoms are not responding to medication or any other surgical treatment. So this is a last ditch effort. And the good thing is that it pretty much cures epilepsy, just period. Epilepsy functions by having it's essentially it's electrical activity that bounces back and forth between your two hemispheres, and that electrical activity causes or the electrical activity in and of itself is a seizure. And it causes brain damage. It obviously, if you have a seizure and you're driving, you'll die. If you have a severe enough seizure, you'll die. It's not good all around, and it cures it because when you sever the corpus callosum and some of those commissures, then that electrical activity is isolated to a single hemisphere. which means rather than escalating as it bounces back and forth, it just kind of, fizzles up and dies, and you don't get a seizure or anything like that, and it's fucking awesome. But there are some really interesting symptoms that may arise, not just may arise, will arise, from having the corpus callosum severed. For instance, there's cases of split brain patients who could play 20 questions with themselves. For context, each hemisphere of your brain controls the contralateral half of your body. So your left hemisphere controls the right half of your body and your right visual field, and the right hemisphere controls the left half of your body and the left visual field. And additionally, only the left hemisphere is capable of oral speech. The right hemisphere might be able to read, and sometimes if you give it a bunch of, if you give them a bunch of block letters, they'll be able to spell things, but that's not in all cases. So some split brain patients can play 20 questions with themselves. So, the game goes where, to the right hemisphere, so in the left visual field, a number will flash on the screen. And then, the person will be, instructed to, guess what number it was. So the left hemisphere will guess what number it was, out loud. And then, the right hemisphere will use the left hand to point up for you need to guess higher and down for you need to guess lower. So the communication between the two hemispheres in many contexts is split. It's divided. And this obviously changes depending on how much of the corpus callosum you sever. But the really classic one is that split brain patients can't compare stimuli across visual fields. Split brain patients can't compare visual stimuli across their visual fields. So if you flash a picture of a fox or in the right visual field, and a picture of a rhinoceros in the left visual field, the person will not be able to say if they're the same or different. If it's appearing in the right visual field, they'll be able to say what it is. They'll be able to describe it. And classically, they will not be able to describe the stimuli in the left visual field. And yeah, super crazy, interesting stuff. Actually, there was a study in 2017 with very, very, very interesting implications, where it showed that split brain patients, of those who were tested, which was 2 split brain patients, these 2 split brain patients could both detect and localize stimuli from anywhere in the visual field with both hands or orally, which is crazy, because these are what they're capable of are things that split brain patients absolutely were not capable of in other studies. A lot of the classic studies from the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And you've got to say, why is that? Why is this true? And the most likely hypothesis right now is neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to form new or develop new neurons and heal itself, and or not in this context, but it can also mean reallocating functions to an undamaged portion of the brain. So the implication of this is that these people's okay, I'll go back a little bit. The difference between these patients and the patients in the classic studies are that these patients who were tested in 2017 were 20 years post-op. And the patients who were tested in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they were all a couple of years post-op or within a year post-op. So from this difference and the difference in their abilities, we can say, it's a pretty sturdy hypothesis that it's because of neuroplasticity. Their brains somehow healed themselves over time, which is just astounding. It's an example of neuroplasticity like we've never seen before. There are pretty dramatic examples with just reallocation of functions, but totally healing an injury like that is crazy. Not totally. Partially healing an injury like that is crazy. These patients, of course, still couldn't compare stimuli across visual fields, but the detection and localization was huge. It's caused a massive stir. Things are very, very messy in the neuropsych community right now. The girls are fighting. Unfortunate. But it's so cool. What else did I want to say about it? I guess that's all. Yeah.
Well, that was pretty incredible. I wish I could understand more than 60% of it.
Oh shit, you're gonna start echoing now because my headset died.
Okay, that's great.
But yeah. You need to let me practice you need to let me practice my presentation skills with you because I need to do a presentation on it and it needs to be understandable. So I need you to be able to...
what's understandable to somebody in your class is going to be very different than what's understandable to me.
Well, it's not to people because this is an honors project, so it's an independent study. There's no one in my class. It has to be understandable to a panel of judges who have no credentials in neurology or psychology.
Again, I am very different than the average person in terms of my ability to understand information that's presented. So don't use me as an example.
Well, I want you to understand it too because it's cool.
Well, I don't understand anything because I'm stupid.
No.
So it's not going to work.
No. Wrong.
All right. With that out of the way, is there anything else we need to talk about?
Nope.
Sorry, I don't mean to sound disinterested. I'm just extremely sad.
Why are you sad?
I'm not talking about it on the podcast.
Okay. Want to do plugs?
Sure. Where can our listeners find you?
Twitter. Talk to me on Discord. I have a YouTube channel. You can go watch me debate Michael Knowles, if you want to.
Matt Knowles.
Yeah.
Cool. You can find me. I don't give a shit. Listen to this podcast. I don't care. Yeah, and that's it. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. See ya.